Please take a moment, if you haven't already done so, to silence your cell phones and other electronic devices. Though we do encourage you to tweet about what you hear this evening with our Twitter handle @WACPhila after the program. And the Council is also availing itself of a number of other social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all of which can be accessed from our website. As of today, we have 962 likes on Facebook. I have been assured that if we reach 1,000, Oprah Winfrey will give all of you a car. So please help yourself by liking us. Do it tonight. Our format for this evening will involve Congressman Ryan being interviewed about his new book by Michael Smerconish, followed by questions from this audience. If you would like to ask a question during the Q&A, please write it on the note card found on your seats and hand it to a staff person when indicated. I'll be selecting questions during the discussion to use during our Q&A. Obviously, I apologize in advance. We won't get to everything, but we'll cover as much ground as we can. Immediately following this program, the Council's A.J. Raju Millennial members who have registered will proceed to the Sheridan Room to your left, outside of this room, for our talkback session to be facilitated by Dan Kessler, who is an investment analyst at Brandywine Realty Trust and the National Finance Chair for Young Professionals for Ready for Hillary. Obviously, we're going to have, as we always do, nonpartisan forums.
Yeah, so I see. Yeah.
I want to thank Council Vice Chair AJ and Dan Kessler for making that part of the program possible. Our guests for this evening's program will be introduced by Timothy Gillespie, President for the Mid-Atlantic region for Wilmington Trust, an M&T company. Tim's been with Wilmington Trust for 17 years, having most recently served as Group Vice President. Tim also serves as a vital member of the World Affairs Council's Board of Directors. On behalf of the Council, let me offer our thanks to Wilmington Trust, M&T Bank, and to Tim for their ongoing support of our work and for support of this evening's program. Please welcome Tim Gillespie.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Craig. Wilmington Trust and M&T Bank are long-standing and very proud partners of the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia, and we are pleased to support the Council's educational and civic missions. On behalf of M&T, Philadelphia Region President Ira Brown, and our entire organization, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you this evening our distinguished guest and my Irish cousin, Congressman Paul Ryan. Congressman Ryan is currently serving his 8th term as a member of Congress representing Wisconsin's 1st Congressional District. In 2012, Congressman Ryan was the Republican Party nominee for Vice President of the United States. In addition to that high honor, the Congressman is probably best known as the chairman of the House Budget Committee. It has been widely reported that in the new Congress, he will become chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, with jurisdiction over tax policy, Social Security, and health care, among other areas. We are delighted that Congressman Ryan has chosen the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia for his first appearance to promote his recently released book, The Way Forward, Renewing the American Idea. Congressman Ryan will be interviewed about the substance of his book by a good friend of the World Affairs Council, Michael Smerconish, who, as you all know, hosts thoughtful and provocative talk shows on Sirius Satellite Radio and CNN television. So to begin this evening's conversation, Michael, I am happy to turn the program over to you.
Tim, thank you very much. Welcome to Philadelphia.
Hey, thanks, man.
Great to see you. Appreciate it. My parents love telling a story, Congressman, about the first time they bought a new car. It was a 1966 Chevy Impala. And as they tell the story, they were en route to Reedman's Auto Mall. Bruce Toll is here tonight. I think he still owns it. And this was a new car, still one that lacked air conditioning. And as they tell the story, we were, my brother and I, in the back seat of a decrepit station wagon, bawling our eyes out at the idea that we were going to part with the wagon and get the new Chevy Impala. I bring it up because early in the book you tell a story about how you have been given the honor of being the vice presidential candidate for the Republican Party, and now comes the time to break the news to your kids. Doesn't go over so well. What happened?
No, as you know, with these things, secrecy is a big deal. And we knew that if we told our kids, we had 6 days notice. I think it was about 6 days notice between when Mitt asked me and we were going to announce it. So Jane and I kept it close and private. We knew if we told our kids, it would probably slip out to the other kids in the neighborhood, and then boom, it's all out there. So we decided to tell our kids on the flight down. And they were kind of wondering, like, why are we sneaking out the backyard and in a van? And then when we basically got to a small airport in Waukegan, Illinois, a lot of curiosity. My daughter figured it out by then. Girls mature a lot faster than boys, by the way. I can tell you one thing. And we told them what was happening. They knew I was being considered, and they said, wait a second, does this mean we have to leave Janesville? And we said, well, yeah, if we win, it does, at least for 4 or 8 years. And they just started bawling. And
until you told them there's a pool.
yeah, so my young guy, Sam, I said, well, there's a pool at the house we go to if we win. He's like, oh, okay, I could probably handle that. My middle one, though, took him about a month to come around. And my daughter, she's kind of understood the bigger picture of things, and she was excited about it.
How have they reacclimated to Janesville after that experience?
It didn't take much time at all, maybe a day. It's the security is a lot more than you expect. Not only do you have a detail, but your wife has a detail, and my kids had a Secret Service detail. So imagine, in Wisconsin, we have corn mazes during Halloween. So imagine your kids going through the corn maze in Halloween with a Secret Service detail. Going to school, going to, cross country and those things. So it was a little different of a lifestyle than we're used to in Janesville, but they reacclimated easily. My wife told me earlier in the summer that when Mitt Romney doesn't pick me to be vice president, because none of us, we didn't think we would be picked. I'm the guy who had all the budget cuts, right? And she said I could buy this wood pellet smoker that I really wanted to buy because I like to smoke ribs and briskets and things like that. And my friends in Congress got it for me afterwards, so I got a pretty good consolation prize, the way I look at it.
In the beginning of the book and at the end of the book, and I've had the privilege of reading it, of course, it's just been released, and these folks have not yet had that opportunity. But both in the beginning of the book and at the end of the book, you paint a picture of comparison between Janesville, Wisconsin, and Detroit, Michigan. Among other things, you say that for purposes in the book, the important distinction is the different ideas about government.
Right.
How so?
Right, because they're two very different towns in size and in many respects, but about government. If you look at the way Detroit was governed, the borrowing, the taxing, the passing the bill on, they went into bankruptcy. And think about how wonderful of a city this was the iconic city that then went into bankruptcy. And look at the vacant homes, look at the crime rate, look at the educational pitiful results that you had. And so what we see when we see government going in the wrong direction is a cautionary tale that if we keep those kinds of policies up, that could happen to the rest of the country. In Janesville, which has had its share of knocks, we were a GM town. We used to say in Janesville, as GM goes, so goes Janesville. Well, we lost our plant, our biggest employer, hundreds of millions of dollars of payroll gone like that in our town. A lot of the guys, my buddies from high school worked there, lost their livelihoods. And so we got hit too. But we had a fantastic community in Janesville, what I like to call civil society. Civic organizations, churches, charitable organizations, people, neighbors, really working together to bring people back up, to help people get reconnected with a good future, to decentralize our economy. And so I talk about, different ideas of governing. I talk about civil society, and I talk about cautionary tales about the wrong direction for our country, that we have to watch these danger zones ahead of us and make sure that they don't happen here. And that's a big part of this book.
Obviously, there are significant differences between the two.
Huge difference.
I did some rudimentary searching online just to see the difference relative to race or education, poverty, even unemployment. You're not saying, are you, that all that worked well in Janesville could
No.
necessarily apply to Detroit.
No, but I'm just saying, people ask, why do you believe what you believe? Well, I am a product of where I come from. I come from a relatively small town in the Midwest in Wisconsin, which taught me the American idea, and I come from a family that had its share of knocks, and its fortunes. It's good. We had a great close family, but I came from a community where the American idea was really clear, where the condition of your birth didn't determine the outcome of your life, where people looked out for each other in the community. And so I think it's a good story to tell, but I also look at wonderful places like Detroit, which I believe is in the midst of a great comeback. I believe that and that's what I talk about at the end of the book, which is look at the seeds of renewal and a comeback that are being planted and occurring in Detroit right now. It's really exciting, and I see those kinds of seeds being planted all around this country. So at the end of the day, I really believe we can and will turn things around in this nation, but we have to have the right leadership, we have to apply the right principles and the right solutions.
In the book, you remind us of one of the better-known sound bites from the 2012 cycle, President Obama, in this case in Roanoke, Virginia, as you quote him saying, "If you've got a business, you didn't build that, somebody else made that happen." There's a much larger quote with which that's associated. And the reason that I bring it up on the heels of referencing Janesville is that what he said in Roanoke more fully was, if you were successful, somebody along the line gave you some help. There was a great teacher somewhere in your life. Somebody helped create this unbelievable American system that we have allowed to thrive. Somebody invested in roads and bridges. Then the words, if you got a business, you didn't build that, somebody else made it happen. The point is that when we succeed because of our individual initiative, but also because we do things together. And after I went back and I pulled the totality of the quote, I said, it sounds a lot like the picture you paint of Janesville. Isn't that what he was really trying to say?
I think if you take the totality of his philosophy, of what he said, I talk about the life of Julian here in quite a bit, the fullness of the liberal progressive vision, I think it is quite different. And I think it is one that sees the public sector and the government as the center of American society, where I would argue that society is the center of American life. And so I try to talk about two different ways of governing, two different philosophies and the policies that flow through them. A society-centered vision of American life, which is more collaborative, or a government-centered American life, which is more coercive, which I really do believe is the product of the policies coming out of not just this administration, but the philosophy that propels it. And so it's not just this president. I go to great lengths to say I'm not trying to impugn a person's motives. I just think that the ideas and the practical results of these policies are taking us on the wrong path. And here's the deal. I'm critical of the direction our country is going. I think we're on the wrong track. Okay, great. So easy to be a critic in Congress. Here's what I owe you and everybody else in this country as an elected leader. I owe an alternative. How would I do things differently? What would I do differently to change the course of the country if I think it's on the wrong track? That's what this book is about. So this is the point I keep making, which is it is not enough for us to criticize. We have to tell people how we would do things differently and how our solutions would make a bigger and more positive difference in their lives if other people agree with me that we're on the wrong track.
Has that been a failure of the GOP recently to articulate what the party stands for as compared to what it's opposed to?
I think that's fair in many respects. I also think, and I talk about this to a great deal, we have to expand our audience. We have to give people the respect of trying for their votes, of appealing to their good natures, and showing them our solutions. You and I both worked for Jack Kemp, and he was a real mentor to me. I wouldn't be sitting here in this chair probably if it weren't for Jack Kemp. He's the person who sort of drew me into...
Neither would I, frankly.
Yeah, he drew me into public service as a vocation. And Jack was the best there ever was at connecting with people, and he had such a passion for policy and principles and ideas, and he wasn't afraid to take them anywhere because he was so excited to share them with people. We need to have that passion back as a party, and that's the point I keep making.
In the book, you make the argument, I was going to come to this, but I'll come to it now, but you make the argument that there's an outreach problem here by the GOP. It's an argument that assumes the message is all intact. We just haven't been able to reach people and sell it to them, and I didn't sense accommodation or the view that maybe the message needs to change and that the GOP message is ill-suited for the times.
I wouldn't say it that way, and I don't think that's an accurate description because I talk about the fact that we need to get in the business of talking about how to better fight poverty, that we need to show that how our principles apply to the problems that people are experiencing in their lives which we need to do more of, can be real solutions. That's why I dedicate at least a couple chapters to better ideas for fighting poverty. I talk about some amazing Americans that I have met traveling through this country who are overcoming circumstances of poverty, doing incredible things, and how we need to back that up, and how we need to apply our principles to better ideas. So that's something that's new and different that the Republican Party has not adequately addressed, that I think we do need to address to, better yet, expand our appeal, but more importantly, show that we have solutions for all of these problems that people are confronting in this country.
I'm going to come back to that substance in a moment. Let's play Jeopardy, which means I give you the answer.
Okay.
The answer is Paul Ryan, Jay Leno, Pink, Sharon Stone, Jeff Bezos, and Michael Smerconish.
I have no clue where you're going with this one.
Name some people who worked at McDonald's.
Okay. Very good.
I gave you the layup,
Yeah,
Congressman.
you did
Come
give me the
on.
layup. Yeah, and we talked about this earlier. Yeah, but the funny thing about that is the manager said, I don't think you have the personal skills to work the front, so I'm putting you back in the quarter grill. So
They put me in maintenance.
Yeah.
I'm having to transition from a laugh to a serious subject. It's the summer of 1986. You've just completed your sophomore year in high school. You are working at McDonald's one night, and the following day, the phone rings and it sets off a chain of events where you recognize your dad has passed. Of what significance to your career today was that episode that early in your life?
I don't know how I can underappreciate the significance of it. It was a trajectory-changing moment. My mom was in Denver visiting my sister, who just graduated from Madison at University of Wisconsin. Got a job out there. She was out there with my aunt. My other brother already graduated from college, was living upstate New York, and my brother Tobin had a job with the Parks Service, the park system in Janesville, and was off having breakfast with somebody that morning. And so my dad's office called and said, "Where is he?" I was going to sleep in and mow the lawn. I thought he was at work, and he was dead. When you're 16, you know, I had to basically put it together. I called the ambulance. They called the local funeral director, who was a friend. And I had to tell my brother and the rest of my siblings. My mom, you know, this is before cell phones. My mom was already in the 20-hour drive back. So my other siblings flew in. My brother Tobin and I picked them up, and the next day my mom drove in the driveway seeing her kids there, and her birthday was just a few days earlier, so she thought they all flew in to surprise her. So, you know, it was a pretty, it's a moment I wouldn't want to wish on anybody else. And I basically felt sorry for myself for a while. You know, you kind of go into a sulk and pity, and I basically decided I'm going to either sink or swim. I'm going to not be a drain on my mom, who had to go back to school and learn a trade, and be there for her and my grandma, who moved in with us, and not wallow in self-pity and make something of myself, and grow up fast. And so, you know, that's kind of what I try to do.
When you get to Congress, and when I chatted with you earlier on radio, I guess said, what a pair of strange bedfellows, and somebody said, is that what you intended to say to Paul Ryan? Barney Frank, there's the laugh line,
I got you. Yeah.
gives you counsel, good advice.
Yeah.
And he said, look, don't be a generalist here, specialize. And your hallmark, your forte, are matters of budget and entitlements.
There's specialties I took on. Yeah.
So to the folks who are standing out front tonight in front of the Union League, they view you as someone who's ready to eradicate the safety net. But let's go back now to Dad's passing, because you actually became a beneficiary of Social Security.
Yeah.
So you are one who has personally experienced what the safety net is all about. Speak to that issue.
Yeah, so, I mean, and to your earlier question, basically I got the lesson, life is short, you better make the most of it. You know, when your dad, your grandfather, and your great-grandfather don't make it to 60 years old, life is short, make the most of it. That's one of the reasons why I'm pretty conscious about my health. I had survivor benefits, which helped me pay for college, helped my mom go back to school. My grandma, it helped us pay for a lady to come in during the day when my mom and I were at school. She had Alzheimer's, so she needed a lot of care. And the point I keep making about these entitlement reforms is there are some who will just try to caricature you as against these things if you're against the status quo. I got to tell you, the status quo is these programs are going bankrupt. We're going from 40 million retirees to 80 million retirees in one generation, and we have far fewer people coming into the system to pay for them. So we have a problem. And the longer we kick the can down the road, the harder and tougher the solutions will be. So my argument is, let's make this solvent. Let's make this safety net something that not only my mom can rely on and people in or near retirement who already organize their lives around this promise get that promise kept, but those of us who are younger, let's make sure that they're there for us when we retire. And doing nothing means bankruptcy. So you've got to do something to fix these programs because they are very important. Look, a lot of folks say because we're conservative means we're against all government. Far from it. I'm for a limited government. That means I want it to be effective in what it's supposed to do. And one of the things government's supposed to do is have a safety net that is there for people who cannot help themselves, and that is there for people who, when they're down on the luck, helps them get back on their feet. And so that, to me, is what a real good limited government conservative ought to do, which is make government work, make it effective, and have it respect its limits so that what it does do well.
You write about February of 2010. Many of us may have watched this because it was televised on C-SPAN. The president has what's described as a bipartisan meeting on health care at Blair House. When you have the floor, Congressman, you say, we want people to be in control. Does that level of control extend to not being insured? And by that, I mean, do you agree with the fundamental premise of Obamacare that everyone has a personal responsibility to have their own health insurance?
Yeah, I would do it a lot differently, though.
But that fundamental precept.
So, yeah, Tom Coburn and I offered an alternative to Obamacare back in 2009, which assures universal access to affordable health insurance for everybody, especially low-income people and people with pre-existing conditions. So my argument is, as a co-author of the HSA law, that there's a better way of actually getting access to quality, affordable health care in a patient-centered system where everybody has universal access to health care. I think that this is critical, it's achievable, and I think Obamacare went in the exact opposite direction to achieve these goals.
I purchased my family's health insurance via the exchange. I had a nightmarish experience. It took me 6 weeks to get in the door. When I finally got in the door, for my family of 6, actually we have a daughter who's now 26, so she's off the plan, but for my family of 5, I was offered 36 different plans. And when I finally got a look at the competition between all of those plans and the differences between them, I said to myself, what could be the objection of a Paul Ryan? This is free market competition. I'm looking by price and I'm deciding what I'm prepared to pay. And they were all private insurers, and I'm picking all my doctors.
Far from it. Far from
How
it.
so?
Far from it, because the rules on the exchanges, the inability of you to pick and choose the kinds of insurance you want. You may not want hair restoration, coverage. You may not want some of the coverage you're forced to buy. Point one, point two, we should have more competition. At the end of the day, my belief is that you're going to see a massive consolidation in the insurance industry because of Obamacare, because only the big ones are going to survive. They'll make it up on margin. In Ways and Means Committee, we'll have Cuba, Cigna, United, Blue Cross, Aetna, and Anthem, which is basically de facto public utilities giving effectively government-run health care. You will reduce competition in the insurance industry. You will end up raising costs, and I also believe you'll break the bank. And more to the point, I think the problem with Obamacare, and just the actuaries bear this out, is because it under-reimburses healthcare providers. Talk to your hospitals, talk to your doctors, talk to your nursing homes. It makes their payments go toward what Medicaid pays. Medicare goes to Medicaid at the end of the decade, Medicaid's at Medicaid, exchange goes to Medicaid, and guess what? In most states, yours and mine included, you get often less than the cost of reimbursement. You pennies on the dollar, and what that means is providers are going to go out of business. So I really believe that they got it fundamentally wrong, and not only that, but the way they passed this law, no involvement from the other side, they jammed it through, they wrote it under duress in Harry Reid's office, and then they put that into law because they lost their 60th vote in the Senate. I think the law is going to implode under its own weight, and I think as Republicans, it's not enough to just say repeal, repeal, repeal. We have to say what we would replace it with. I talk about that a great deal in this book as well.
In the book, you talk about the origin of the American model, which makes us rather unique. We're coming out of World War II because there were limitations on wages. Yeah. We created this system where we look to employers. Should we get away from that system?
Yes, I think we should, and I specifically talk about that because a couple of things. You don't have the same job for the rest of your life like we did in the 20th century. Look, Janesville and GM is a good example. Where I come from, people did have the same job for most of their lives. That is not the way the 21st century works. Point one. Point two, I think that the tax exclusion, the way that this works, is it insulates people from seeing what prices are. It creates a third-party payment system that is a big driver of inflation. Economists from the left and the right on very few things agree, but on this they do, that it's a big driver of health inflation. More to the point, you're discriminating against people who don't get health care from their jobs. Let's equalize the tax treatment so that everybody gets health care, whether they get it at their job or not. And more to the point, we're subsidizing the wrong people. The person in the top tax bracket gets the biggest subsidy, and the person in the lowest tax bracket gets the lowest subsidy. That makes no sense. That's not the person who has a hard time getting health insurance, so I think we should fix that, and I propose exactly how to do that.
You write in the book about your participation in what we all refer to as Simpson Bowls. You were a member of the commission. You voted against the recommendations. What confused me, Congressman, is that you then lamented President Obama's failure to buy into those recommendations. Quote, "The easiest way for the president to moderate would be to embrace the Simpson Bowles report." I wish that he had embraced Simpson Bowles. I wish Simpson Bowles had received the requisite number of votes coming out of your commission, which would have forced the hand of legislators to deal with it.
That was my point, was I think...
But how could you respectfully have said in the book, hey, I didn't vote for it, but why the heck isn't he embracing it?
Yeah, you know why? Because I put out an alternative. I took the ideas I liked in Simpson Bowles, such as the amendment that Alice Rivlin, Clinton's OMB director, and I offered at Simpson Bowles, which was rejected by the Democrats, to do Medicaid reform, to do Medicare reform. And the reason why I voted against it, the top reason was it didn't address the driver of our debt, health care. So I didn't think it would be right to go out to the country and say, I'm signing up for a plan that will fix the nation's fiscal problems, when I know it didn't, because it did not address the biggest driver of our debt, health care. And so what did I do? I took all those other ideas I liked in Simpson Bowles and added these other proposals to it and passed it through Congress. That's what leaders do. The president has never done that. He has never put out a plan that meets the metric and the benchmarks of Simpson Bowles, and so that's the point I was making. The other point I said was, it would have been smart of him, I thought, politically, to embrace it, to look more moderate, to do sort of the Clintonian triangulation and make us look less moderate. I think he would have probably been smart to do that. I thought he was going to do that. And what I realized at that moment, at that speech at George Washington, was he was no Clinton Democrat. He really went all to the left. He doubled down, and that was the moment I realized this is who he is. He wasn't going to moderate, and it was going to be a long time before we saw.
I thought it would have been a great starting point. If you had voted it out of the commission, then the Congress would have been forced to deal with it, but I'm on the sideline. I'm moving quickly because I only get you for 5 more minutes, and as you can tell, I wish I had 5 more hours, and thank you for this exchange.
Hey, look, I get it.
You say in the book that the president wants to shrink our spending and defense. Why shouldn't we? We're out of 2 wars.
He wants to take our Navy to the level we haven't seen since pre-World War I. He wants to take our Army to a level we haven't seen since pre-World War II. He wants to take our Air Force to a level we've never seen before. Why shouldn't we? Because it's not a peaceful planet. It's a dangerous world. And by the way, the first primary responsibility of the federal government is to secure the common defense of the nation. And so I very much believe, and I've put I passed 4 budgets that says, here's what I'll cut, here's what I'll reform, and here's what I'll do. So, and they balance, and they add up, and they pay down the debt. So I put my money where my mouth is, and I really do believe that he is jeopardizing our national security with what I call irresponsible defense budgets. His first defense budget I liked. That was the Bob Gates budget. That's one we actually agreed with him then and passed that through. But subsequent budgets, to me, where he was budgeting, they were budget-driven strategies, not strategy-driven budgets. And that, to me, was reckless. And I think that it was the week Vladimir Putin invaded Crimea that he sent a budget to Congress that did what I just described. I think that breeds weakness. I think that says America's retreating from its place in the world, and that, in my opinion, undermines our national security and makes us less secure and less prosperous.
Let me share with you an observation. I pay close attention to the polling data. I know you do as well. The president's approval rate with regard to foreign policy right now is somewhere in the 36, 37% range.
Yeah, so he's with Congress.
It's horrific. It's a little bit better, I think, than Congress in that respect. I have to say that. I think you're at 15%. I wasn't going to bring it up.
All right.
But Congressman, when I look at the internals of those polls, here's what I note. Overall, how do you like the job Obama's doing on foreign policy? I'll say, I don't like it. Nobody seems to like it. On the internals, when you say, well, do you want us more committed in Iraq? No. Should we get involved in Syria? Heck no. Should we be doing X, Y, and Z? In other words, when you break it down policy by policy, his approach of not engaging militarily in each of these circumstances seems to be exactly what the country wants.
Of all issues where you have to not worry so much about polling, and I'm not a big poll watcher personally, actually, is this. If you see a gathering threat on the horizon, it may not be popular to address it, but you should address it if you're the commander-in-chief. Look, when we failed to get the status of forces agreement in Iraq, when the president made declarations in Syria and then didn't follow through, I think those are two classic mistakes that have given rise to the problems we're seeing right now, where one of our citizens was beheaded by this terrorist organization, which is like Al-Qaeda 3.0. ISIS is a serious threat, very well organized, very well funded, and if we don't address this threat where they are, we will be addressing them here, in my opinion. And so I do believe that as a commander-in-chief, you have to see these threats gathering on the horizon. It doesn't mean go and invade a bunch of countries, but it means you have to make decisions, even if they're unpopular, for the sake and the security of the American people.
With regard to ISIS, do you believe... I think you've answered this, but let me ask it directly, because I want to draw in a Zell Miller soundbite that I remember from...
What, Spitballs?
The Republican... No, that was good too. Do you believe that we need to fight them over there so that we don't have to fight them here?
Well, as a general, sure. I mean, that's a fairly broad brush, but yes, I would rather deal with it there than here. But the problem is, it's a pretty good case study here, right? Oh, did I just do that? It's a pretty good case study, which is you see Islamic extremists trying to form a caliphate in parts of two countries. They want to get access to oil, to money, and do you think they just want to stay there? No. So we should see this threat for what it is. We should respond to it for what it is. And yes, we should deal with it there instead of having it come here. You can't ignore these things happening in the world.
In other words, you put them in the Al-Qaeda category, not the Taliban category. I've always...
Absolutely.
Okay.
ISIS, yeah, no, I've read enough intel reports on it, yes.
One or two more, and then I'm going to relinquish the floor to Craig. Pat Buchanan just wrote a great book. It's called The Greatest Comeback. It's about Richard Nixon in the 60s. Nixon in the wilderness. Not only does he lose to Kennedy by a thin margin, then he loses the California gubernatorial. People write him off. Pat has a front row seat and watches the re-emergence of Richard Nixon. Might Mitt Romney, in the next cycle, be the Richard Nixon of '68?
It would be a great story if he did. I would love it if he did. I think people... one of the frustrations I always had was, gosh, I wish they just knew the guy I know. You know what I mean? That was one of the... did you see that movie Mitt, or that documentary Mitt on Netflix?
Yeah, it's fabulous. Fabulous.
That's who he is. And so I got to know him in Wisconsin in our primary. And actually, your former senator was very competitive at that time, and I was neutral until it came to Wisconsin, and I supported Mitt and spent a whirlwind time through the state. I'm like, wow, this guy's pretty darn intelligent. Then I realized he's a really great, honorable man of integrity. And then I campaigned with him, then I worked with him, then we put together a 200-day plan, and I thought, this guy's going to be a great president. He has what it takes. He has the temperament, he has the intellect, but he has the principles and the integrity. And so, yeah, I would love it if you...
He says no.
I know he says it all the time.
Do you think there's an opportunity?
It won't be for my lack of trying. I'll sure try. I tell him all the time you should run.
You told me you're on the radio earlier today. I didn't even waste the question of what are you doing in 2016. But I did ask you if he goes, would you sit it out? You said yes.
Yeah, of course. I am that fond of the man, and I do believe he would make a great president.
My final question for you, and again, thank you for being so gracious. Thank you, World Affairs, for allowing me to do this. The economy. I looked at a story today on the front page of the Times. It said that housing starts are up 22% over the last 12 months. I don't know where the Dow closed. It's somewhere at the 17,000 level. And I recognize that unemployment is somewhere in the low 6% range. What occurs to me is if those numbers existed nearly 2 years into a Romney-Ryan administration, people would be walking around saying, see that? All we need to do was get rid of Obama.
I don't see it that way. I see the highest poverty rate in a generation. I see the highest deep poverty rate since we've recorded it. I see the worst post-war recovery on record. I see a labor force participation rate we haven't seen in over something like 35 years. I see people slipping through the cracks, and I see the Federal Reserve creating money, creating a wealth effect, which is the Obama version of trickle-down economics, which is punishing savers, and I think putting our currency at risk. And I see bigger problems on the horizon with our debt, which is not getting addressed, which, by the way, according to the Congressional Budget Office, is slated to take off in a few years. So there are too many problems that have been unaddressed in this country that if we continue to kick the can down the road, we will rue that day. That is why I believe we need to give this country a very clear and meaningful choice on a different path forward if they don't like it. Sounds like you like it. I don't like it. A lot of folks don't. And that means we policymakers, leaders, should offer a different way forward. That's what this book is about, which is here's the governing philosophy we ought to employ. It's tethered to our founding principles, and I believe it will produce more upward mobility, more effectively fight poverty, and reconnect Americans who have lost sight of the American idea.
I don't like it all. I just think that we live in much more of a nuanced world, and that glass is either really half full or really half empty.
Well, let me make a half full point real fast, which
Sure.
is we can turn this around. The comeback is there. The seeds of regeneration are there. We just got to do a handful of things right, and I really think we can turn this country in the right direction.
Thank you for this privilege.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
Watch that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks. You know, every time I come to this town, I think 4th and 24. It just, it haunts me. It haunts me. I mean, how on earth did Donovan McNabb, pull that off?
We remember it.
Yeah, I know you remember it, but every time I just think of that.
As expected, we got far more questions than we can cover. So think of this as sort of the
Lightning round.
Microphone.
Oh, is his?
Microphone is on.
The sound guys.
Okay, here we go.
Here comes a guy. I can hold mine over too if you want. No, that's on.
Now we're on.
Okay.
Okay, everybody here? No.
Put it closer to your face, maybe.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah.
Okay, how about now? How are we doing? Okay, all right. So we did get a lot more
Put it
questions
on this
than we
side.
can
Your
use.
face is facing that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Let
me help
you.
you.
You are multi-talented.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
You're multi-talented.
Okay, and then speak right into that.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's a first. I like that. Okay, so let's get rolling. What is your perspective on what's been revealed about the NSA surveillance of Americans?
It should be taken very seriously. We, in this age of technology, need to be very cognizant of our civil liberties. I've learned a lot about this program, what it does and does not do. There is a terrorist threat, and technology can help us address that threat. Okay, so that sounds like two sides of a different coin. I voted for the Sensenbrenner Amendment, which worked to contain this program and bring it back within the confines of the Patriot Act that gave it its authorization. Because I do believe that legislators need to have hard legal firewalls surrounding these technologies so that unelected people in our intelligence community or wherever don't have too much running room to go and have the temptation to violate our civil liberties. And if they don't believe that they have enough to do what they need to do to go out terrorists, come back to Congress and make your case.
We got a number of questions around the theme of the relationship between economic issues and social issues in the GOP position.
Sure.
And really the questions go to whether you believe that an emphasis on social issues makes the party unelectable or less electable, and whether that should be reoriented towards an economic platform.
No, I talk about this in the book. So if you want to get my longer perspective on it, I'm a social conservative, and that's kind of well known. but I'm probably known for my emphasis on economics. Here's the way I see it with our party. We need to be a majority party. We need to be a big tent party. And the tallest pole in this big tent is economic liberty, free enterprise, upward mobility, equality of opportunity. If you agree with that, we want you in our party. Let's rally around that big pole. And then, when the time comes, we will agree to disagree on these other issues that are somewhat more controversial. So what does that mean? That means people like me get out and help Scott Brown win that race up in New Hampshire, who has a different opinion on those issues. That means one of my buddies, Mark Kirk, the senator from Illinois, who's a pro-choice person, is a prominent member of our party that is front and center. Democrats don't do that. They're purging. We need to make sure that we accommodate these different views in our party because we have these common principles that unify us, and that by including both schools of thought and unifying around these common principles, we become a majority party. I don't think you gain through subtraction, you gain through addition.
We have a question from a 12th grade student at the Shipley School. What would you have done if you were president right away as the situation in Ferguson unfolded, and what would you do now?
Well, I haven't seen all of what President Obama has said. I've watched one or two of his press comments. I think in these situations, presidents need to be healers, they need to be unifiers, and all leaders should not rush to judgment. All leaders should not fan the passions. That, to me, is important. Now, when the dust settles, first of all, let law enforcement do their job, let the facts come out, and let justice be served. But and the one thing I want to say is I don't think it's right for politicians or political leaders to try and graft or attach their policy preferences to a tragedy. So out of respect for the Brown family and the community, I don't want to say, here's what I would do differently and here's what I would do on a policy front. But I do believe going forward, we need to work on integrating people in our communities, integrating those who are struggling to make ends meet. And this is what I talk about in poverty. This is what I talk about in upward mobility. And I do believe that civil society is the key fabric that ties this country. I talk about Alexis de Tocqueville and how his wonderful observations of America, what made us so special, was the fact that we have all these little platoons. We have civil society where people who live their lives in the space between themselves and the government is where we work together. I talk about Catholic social teaching. Solidarity and subsidiarity conjoined together, along with the preferential option for the poor. What that means as a lay person is we have to get involved in our communities, each and every one of us, because we all have responsibilities to each other in our communities to make a positive difference. And I think that is the kind of leadership that ought to be provided. And also, a government that is too big, that doesn't have limits that it adheres to, can have the inadvertent or effect of displacing that civil society, of crowding it out, of competing with it. One of the biggest problems, I think, in the war on poverty is we've reinforced inadvertently this notion that this is government's responsibility. Pay your taxes, send your money to government, and they'll take care of it. Not true. Each and every one of us have a responsibility. Maybe not with our money, but with our time, with our talents, with our efforts. That's how you fix these problems in our communities. So I think that this issue goes to beyond just, what do you say in the moment? That means be a uniter, be a healer, bring people together. But you also talk about how do we prevent these kinds of, how do we speak to the emotions and to the anguish that we're seeing on our TV screens that we're hearing from people when we visit communities around this country?
So you have offered an anti-poverty proposal both before the book and in the book. Can you tell our audience how you believe that your proposals are a better approach to solving the problem that you've identified of long-term intergenerational poverty?
So first of all, I don't have all the answers. Let me just say that. And what I'm trying to do is begin a conversation. And I think in an issue like this, you need to be humble in your approach to it. I spent about the last 2 years traveling the country with my friend Bob Woodson, who's an old Jack Kemp guy like me, who runs a group called the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, meeting with people around the country who are fighting poverty very effectively, learning from them. We need to do a lot of that. And I write about some of their stories in the book. But what I propose is changing our emphasis on our poverty-fighting strategies to have the federal government respect its proper role, which is provide resources, but not to take the lead in our communities by displacing those things that are working very successfully. That's point number one. Point number two, we have been measuring success in the war on poverty, which is in its 50th year, based on inputs. How much money are we spending? How many programs are we creating? We're not measuring it based on results, based on outcomes. How many people are we getting out of poverty? And so I think we need to change our emphasis on what works. And that's a number of the proposals I've formed. And when you take a look at the proposals, and I won't go on too long because I could go on for 3 hours about this, is you need aid that is local, that is direct and customized. This woman might have a problem with job training or daycare or food. This guy might have a problem, with unemployment and addiction. Everybody has a different problem, especially with generational poverty, systemic poverty. And so we need to have better strategies that go at the root cause of poverty to break the cycle of poverty so we can truly measure success by how many people we actually get out of poverty. And I believe this sort of one-size-fits-all Byzantine rules of all these administrative programs from Washington is frustrating that. You take all these programs together, 92 of them spending $800 billion a year about in the federal government, and they have the inadvertent effect of putting barriers in front of people by, in many ways, disincentivizing work. And so I think we need to make sense of all of it and focus on the objective, which is getting able-bodied people into work, into lives of self-sufficiency, because the bridge to a better life is a job. That's why I talk about prison reform. That's why I talk about sentencing reform. That's why I talk about education reform in a great deal. So it's multifaceted. But what I am trying to do here is get beyond the shouts and the name-calling and get into the problem-solving mode where throwing ideas out there so we can start talking. And maybe at the end of that process, we can have some better results than the ones we have today.
So we have a question that sort of, in a way, anticipated your last answer. The question is, what's the basis for your faith in states and local government as against the federal government, such as, the questioner says, such as your proposal regarding Medicaid? Historically, the statement here is offered. Historically, isn't it the case that state capitals have been more corrupt and less transparent than the federal government? So what is the basis of your
Federalism, the Constitution, states' rights. Government closest to the people is the most responsive and can govern best. If you don't like your state government, go do something about it. Run for something, vote for somebody, get involved. If you ask me my philosophical premise of it, it is constitutional, but also, and I talk about this. Look, I don't know how many of you are Catholic, and there's this principle called subsidiarity, which is the notion that we should try and fix problems as close to the source of the problem as possible. And if it's not available there, then go up to the next level. It's bottom-up reforms, bottom-up approaches instead of top-down. Because what I've learned from being in the federal government sphere for a long time, top-down doesn't really work. Top-down ignores differences. Top-down isn't personal. And more importantly, we are more and more these days delegating our policymaking to unelected people in bureaucracies who are not responsive to the needs of our citizens.
One more question that's in a general sense along the lines of talking about poverty. The question is, does the conservative movement agree that income inequality and wealth inequality in America is becoming a problem? And is there a conservative economic equality policy agenda?
Yeah, I talk about this in the book quite a bit. I also talk about the fact that in our communities, we are segregating ourselves based on socioeconomic lines. You see, this is a dangerous trend that you see. Bob Putnam did a great job writing about this in Bowling Alone and all of his work at Harvard. I quote him in the book. We're losing social capital. People are migrating to zip codes of like-minded people, and it's dividing people in this community, in this country. And the question isn't, in my mind, one of looking at the economy as some static fixed pie, and therefore it's the government's job to redistribute the slices. It's dynamic. Let's grow the pie, and let's focus on growing the pie from the bottom up. Let's focus on growing the pie by restoring economic growth and economic opportunity, and that is why I talk about all these ideas about how to have a true pro-growth policy with real economic growth so you have a healthier economy, so people have more opportunities, more jobs, and let's focus on the problems in poverty with an eye toward getting people on the path of self-sufficiency. That's economic growth. It's not take from this person and give to that person. It's help this person get to hitting their potential in their life. That, to me, is the way to go, because I think the premise of these debates are typically, oh, it's just a fixed system, and then we have to have government intervene and redistribute, which that is a path that just doesn't work.
So, related to the larger issue of economic growth, in the post-2008 world, do you believe that Wall Street and the American finance industry more generally is a primary source of economic growth, or as some argue, that it's parasitic on the Main Street economy?
Yes and no. Okay, so what do I mean when I say that? I think Dodd-Frank was a big mistake because I think it has the practical effect of making the big banks bigger and the small banks fewer. I think it amplifies too big to fail, which means you're going to have even more massive and concentrated banks, which I also think will lead to crony capitalism. I think you have a lot of crony capitalism in our financial system, and you want to have a financial system that is transparent, that has equal access to entry. Oh, and by the way, does not favor some firms over others. And I think that that's the kind of a system we have today. The problem for the Republican Party is in far too many ways we have confused being pro-market with being pro-business. We need to be a pro-market party, not necessarily a pro-business party. Because sometimes when you're being a pro-business party, you think that in helping the local, independent, the local incumbent business by giving regulatory forbearance or more spending or a favorable regulation or a favorable piece of the tax code, you're helping them. What you're doing is you're erecting a barrier to entry against their would-be competitor, and you're making everybody pay higher taxes as a result. So I think we have to be mindful of that and work on fighting crony capitalism as it exists and be that pro-market party, which is small business, which is equal access, and I think the financial services market needs some hall cleaning on that.
So we focused mostly on domestic and economic issues, but obviously this being the World Affairs Council, a question about foreign policy. The Bush Doctrine permitted preemptive war, embraced nation building as a responsibility for the United States. President Obama ran for office rejecting the Bush Doctrine and has substantially downsized the scope of American responsibility, and yet he has practiced and is practicing a kind of targeted interventionism. Senator Paul is on the scene, seeming to advocate a broadly non-interventionist policy.
Where do I put myself?
Where do you put yourself?
Yeah.
What is the Ryan foreign policy doctrine?
I will quote my old boss and say that I am a heavily armed dove. And what that means is, heavily armed dove.
Heavily armed dove.
What that means is be humble in what you can expect with your military and have a very strong one. Have a foreign policy that when you say you're going to do something, do something. Be stronger with your allies, forge better relationships with your allies, and make sure that when you see problems gathering on the horizon, do everything you can to prevent them from getting out of control to where you are committing troops. So.
Okay, final question, and the rule is, this one requires yes or no answer.
Oh, yeah, sure. I've been in these traps before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if Governor Romney decides to stay out, are you running for president?
I don't know. That's a 2015 decision. I don't know.
I want to once again thank Congressman Ryan, thank Mike Smerconish, thank Wilmington Trust and M&T Bank, and of course thank all of you for being with us tonight. If you're attending our Millennial Member Talkback session, please enter the Sheridan Room as you leave. Thank you again. We're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Greg.
And